Module 5. What are some of the reasons that students might have difficulty comprehending? Well, comprehension requires a number of processing abilities, and I read that in our text in chapter, I think it was 11, and it talked about that you have to have the accurate word reading and knowledge of the text and the vocabulary. You have to have an understanding of the details and at a literal level. Integrating text across sentences and paragraphs and making basic inferences and monitoring meaning. You've got to have the short-term or working memory, and it's also an essential component of that comprehension. So basically, if the kids don't have that background knowledge or the vocabulary knowledge, then it might not be something that they're able to understand as they read. And it depends on what level they are at in reading. Sometimes you have kids that are great at accuracy, but their comprehension is not there, and that could be lack of just vocabulary words and what they understand and know. And it could be that maybe the way that they were grown up and raised, maybe they're just not familiar with certain things, and they were limited with those experiences in life, because a lot of times you can relate books that they read to things in life, and sometimes those kids just don't have that knowledge and aren't able to do that. So some things that it says, maybe some steps that can be taken to help them, is just to actually what you do in your lesson plans and in small group. You introduce what you're talking about, what strategy you want to use, and you demonstrate the strategy in the model, demonstrate the strategy you're using for comprehension, and you model it to them of how you want them to read a text and understand it. Then you do a guided practice where they're practicing, but you're guiding them through the practice and the strategy they're using. Independently, they do it on their own as you watch them. And then, of course, and applying it in their reading. And then you do an assessment on it, and that could just be a running record where they read to you and you ask them some within text, which is about text, beyond, and things like that, to see how they have understood and grown in their comprehension. There are things that in the world of the knowledge of the world is just different than what maybe the author is presenting in his book, and they just need to know just stronger vocabulary, and so maybe that's something that you just have to work on them. It's just building their vocabulary, and maybe the vocabulary that the author's using in their text is just too much and it's not on their level. So then that's when you need to go back and look at what they're reading and maybe figure out something else that will be more easier for them to comprehend and build on that. And then another thing that I listened to in the comprehension instruction video was that there's a cognitive strategy, and there's an idiom that she uses, and it's called picture, and each letter represents a certain word, and that you want your kids to use in reading. You want to teach them to be able to predict, and that's the P in picture, what's going to happen. You want them to imagine and use their imagination. You want to see, make sure you clarify and make sure it's making sense, the text that they're reading. T, try, and that's how and why, what's going on, why is it going on. U, use what they know, and that's where I said the background knowledge could come in, and it just depends on what kind of background knowledge the kids have. R, review and summarize. Just go back over what was read and discussed. And E, evaluate. How is it connected to other texts that maybe they've read and maybe in their life? And so, and that was not an idiom, it was an acronym. Sorry about that. But that was the acronym she used to help with strategies when you're doing reading with your students, and to think about as you read, and help with comprehension. Read alouds are a great way for K through 5 to use and teach, and have them answer comprehension questions and things like that. And another thing is that the task can just be maybe sometimes too difficult for the kids, and there's just not that support in the classroom that they need. Maybe there's too many kids, or there's just not enough there. And so that could be a problem also that kids could face. And so you just have to figure out what is best and what you can do and what kind of strategy. A lot of the strategy that I use a lot in my class for comprehension is stop and jot. Like, they might read a couple of sentences, or maybe a paragraph, or maybe a chapter, or a couple pages, but after a point where they feel that they maybe need to stop and just jot what's going on in those stories, so that they're aware as they're reading of what's going on. And if they forget or not sure, that's when we talk about, then we go back and we read to make sure that we're understanding what we're reading. And I have one that just really struggles. Her accuracy is great, but her comprehension's not there. So this sort of ties into the next question, but we do a sentence where we'll read a sentence, and this is a little intervention that I'm working on. We'll read a sentence, which I'll give them a passage to read, and after each sentence they have to describe what is going on in each sentence. And that's just building that vocabulary and paying attention to what they're reading. And one of them, I found that it's just, she lacks the vocabulary part. So that's one thing that we're going to have to move into, is just building her vocabulary and making it stronger, so that when she does read, she understands some of these words. Because the accuracy is there doesn't mean that we need to keep going on levels, because the comprehension is not there. So that's where we have to figure out, okay,